All right, welcome back from the workshops. So I'm hoping that you had as much of a great time as I did. I kind of peeked into each one, and I'm just grateful to all the maestros who gave of their time, of their talents, and it is time to hear from Jeremy Utley. So I met Jeremy, 7 or 8 years ago now. Jeremy was my professor when I was at the D.school at Stanford, and I will say that his class is probably the most valuable thing that I did at Stanford. So whatever he says to you today, take it to heart, believe him. So I remember him pushing us a lot in class, just like, try it. What's the worst that could happen? That level of bravery, I would call it bravery. That level of bravery can really do wonders for your career, especially when you couple that in with bravery toward being creative. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Jeremy into the stream. Say a quick hello. There he is. Jeremy, how's it going over there in California?
Great.
What time is it? Tell us.
7 a.m.
So 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning, you are about to tell us things that might be kind of transformational. I'm pretty excited for this. Yeah. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I'm excited to be here. I know where else I'd rather be on Saturday morning.
I mean, that's a really nice shirt. Was that just for us?
I changed into it just for you. This is not my pajamas. Let's put it that way.
All right, Jeremy, take it away.
Excellent. Thanks for the introduction, JR. Today, what I want to talk about is how breakthroughs happen. And I want to start with a story from the mid-1950s. In 1956, there's a single mother named Bette Nesmith Graham living in Dallas, Texas. I'm from Dallas, Texas, so of course I'm partial. She's working as a secretary at a company called Texas Bank and Trust. And Bette has a problem that many secretaries have. She's got an electric IBM typewriter, one of the early versions, and she's constantly bothered by the fact that the carbon ribbon that the typewriter uses to transfer type onto paper smudges her paper. It's driving her crazy. And because she's a perfectionist, and especially because she's working for executives at this company, she spends a lot of her time trying to erase and clean up marks that the typewriter's making. It's a perennial annoyance. She also has something going on that very few secretaries at that time had going on, which is that she's a single mother. And as a single mother, single income household, she's got to pick up side jobs on the weekends to be able to support herself and her son, who, by the way, went on to start a famous American-British invasion band called the Monkees, but that's a separate story. But Bette's weekend hobbies turned into side hustles and gigs to make ends meet because she didn't make enough at Texas Bank and Trust. One of the side hustles that she had going on was she would paint windows at storefronts, grocery stores and banks, and she would paint advertisements and things like that with a painting crew. One day she made a mistake and she started painstakingly erasing it as she normally did. And a painter came by and said, whoa, what are you doing? And she said, I'm just trying to erase this mistake. And he said, Bette, painters don't erase mistakes. They paint over them. And he showed her how she could just paint over it and nobody would ever know what was underneath. In that moment, she had an idea. That carbon ribbon that ruins the paper at my secretarial job, what if I started painting over it? And she, over the next few years, built a product and a company that she ended up selling for, in today's dollars, about $200 million, called Liquid Paper. You might have heard of it, or Whiteout. That's Bette Nesmith Graham's company. And she, of course, had to collaborate with her son's chemistry teacher and a local paint shop employee to figure out the formula. But that initial idea is what I want to talk about, because for the last 12 years, I've been teaching at Stanford, and I've become obsessed with this question of how do breakthroughs happen? Nobody in any class or in any professional context, if you say, do you need less breakthroughs in your life? People go, yeah, I need less breakthroughs. Everybody wants more breakthroughs. And yet my observation, as I've been studying the subject now for over a decade, is most people treat breakthroughs like break-ins. They happen to them. They catch them off guard. They catch them unawares. They're a surprise. And the question that's kind of been dominating my thinking for the last dozen years is, instead of being victims of a breakthrough, could we be perpetrators of breakthroughs? Could we seek out breakthroughs deliberately? And as I have undertaken this quest to understand this question, I've realized that the problem is we have a profound misunderstanding of the nature of creativity. And even more fundamentally, we have a profound misunderstanding of what an idea even is. I'll ask you a question. What is an idea? If you had to describe to a kindergartner what an idea is, what would you say? How would you describe it? It's kind of hard, right? You think, oh, it's a 4-letter word. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But actually, now that I think about it, it's hard to define. And I would say that is the problem, right? The most fundamental unit of a breakthrough, an idea, we can't even define in terms that a kindergartner could understand. Anytime you've got a definition that requires, I hate this, if I look up a word in the dictionary and in the definition, there's a word that I have to look up in another place in the dictionary, it's useless. And I find whenever people start talking about breakthroughs in creativity, they use words that also need to be defined, which is not sufficient for everyday use. Here is my own explanation of my admittedly layman's understanding of the underlying neuroscience. I've been studying it for a long time, and here's what I know to be true. An idea is, are you ready? A connection. That's it. If you look at the underlying neuroscience of what's going on when creativity is happening, when ideas are being formed, what you realize is the following. The brain is not capable of creating new material from scratch. It doesn't do it. What is the brain doing when you have an idea? It's connecting two parts of your brain that weren't connected before. And that's what happened with Bette Nesmith Graham that day, right? She's been struggling with the typewriter. And that day when the painter said, painters don't erase, they paint over it. It's like two Lego blocks come together and form a new idea. I'll give you another example because it's not the exception, it's the rule. This is how the brain works. So a different example, hopefully it will illustrate the point. I am working with a company that will remain nameless that is in the electric vehicle space that is working to extend the range of its vehicles. If you buy an electric car, you might get 300 miles out of it. But a lot of people, it's called range anxiety. A lot of people are nervous about only having 300 miles worth of range in their car and being away from a charging station. So they've been working on this problem, and it's a really difficult technical problem. But one of the engineers the other day happened to be at a cafe, and he was talking, and he overheard a couple of folks from the military come in, and they were talking about how fighter jets have very small fuselages and fuel tanks. And so they have small range, so to speak. But in the military, what they do is they have what's known as a mid-air refueling, where a big tanker comes alongside a jet fighter and actually flies with it autonomously and fills it. Did you see what happened in your mind? You have the idea, right? I haven't even told you what the engineer said, right? But I just gave you two Legos, range anxiety, mid-air refueling, and everybody in the conference goes, I have an idea. That's how it works. That is the nature of ideas. I've got another friend who's got a stroller company, baby strollers, and he's looking to break into the well-heeled market of San Francisco, Silicon Valley elite. But the problem with strollers in San Francisco is the hills. The hills in San Francisco are absurd. You've got like a 30-degree incline in different parts of the city. It makes strollers almost untenable in the city. And he was really struggling with, how do I have a differentiated product in this market? And then one day he remembered when he was a kid, he had a lawn mowing business. And his whole business changed whenever he was able to afford what's called a self-propelled lawnmower. If you're familiar with a self-propelled lawnmower, it's basically has a motor that pushes itself slowly. But you see what happened again. You just have the same idea that my friend with the stroller company had. And I haven't told you the idea. That's the point. The point is that all an idea is a connection. And when you take these two Legos and put them together, you have something new. And you might think, okay, it's all well and good, Jeremy. I get it. An idea is a connection, but how is that practically useful? I would argue it's actually fantastically practically useful. I've got a student from India who is in my class right now, my graduate class at Stanford, and he's a very entrepreneurial student, and he's constantly trying new things, working to build what he hopes will be a VC backable big business. He pulled me aside after class the other day and he said, I just have to tell you, I've been trying to come up with ideas for a long time, and it's been really hard because they're nebulous and amorphous and you don't really know if you've got one. But he said, when you taught me that an idea is a connection, I found it's unleashed a flood of ideas because it's practical, it's tangible. I can seek connections. And furthermore, but it's not just anecdotal. Furthermore, research out of Danish research labs suggests that if you train people in divergent thinking techniques, they become much more creative than people who haven't been trained, which is good. So I have a job. I have job security. But what's interesting is they took people who had been trained in divergent training techniques, and then they also taught them the underlying neuroscience of what's happening in the brain between connections. And which seems, by the way, to me, being 10 plus years in this field, there's no reason to have to be trained in the underlying neuroscience, right? Wrong. Folks who were trained in underlying neuroscience ended up generating 70% more ideas, up to 70%. So it's actually fantastically valuable.